All right, so we are back, Working Man's Kola. We are in the middle of the 20th chapter, dealing with some laws regarding separating and the like. And we went through the first two Mishnayos the last time that we were together. I want to today review these Mishnayos. And then next time, God willing, we'll pick up already with the 21st chapter, and we'll probably move pretty quickly through the rest of the Masechta. But I want to review these first two Mishnayos because they present a number of potential pitfalls a person can fall into when preparing tea or coffee on Shabbos. These Mishnayos present very, very practical shilas, but we'll get to all that in just a minute. Let's just review these first two Mishnayos first. Rabbi Eliezer says, Tolen es hamishmeres biyomtiv, that a person, according to Rabbi Eliezer, can set up the mishmeres, they can set up the strainer on Yom Tov. V'nosnin la teluya b'Shabbos. On Shabbos, you can't set it up, but however, you can use it to strain out the sediments from wine. The Chachamim say, the way we paskin, ein tolen es mishmeres b'Yom Tov, a person cannot put up the mishmeres, they cannot put on the strainer, they can't set it up on Yom Tov. Ain't no stand the teluya b'Shabbos. You can't even use it on Shabbos in order to strain out the sediments. Aval nostin la teluya b'Yom Tov. However, on Yom Tov, you can use it in order to strain out your wine from its sediments, as long as it's already set up. Mishnah Beis. Nosnim mayim al gabe hashmarim. Now, let's say you strained out the wine before Shabbos. Now, sitting in the strainer, sitting in the filter, is perfectly good wine sediment, which absorbed in it is wine. And I want to be able to use that wine concentrate to extract from it in order to have wine on Shabbos. So I want to pour water. So I have the filter that has all the wine sediments. I want to pour water through the filter into my Kiddush cup, in order so I could have wine for Shabbos in Yantiv. Bishvil sheyitzalu. Umisan. So one is allowed to do the misan sayayim b'sudarin kafifa mitzvahs. One is able to do this with other types of instruments. Okay, fine. So the question that really needs to be brought up is what we're learning from these two Mishnayos is, number one, let's say I already have a wine. I already have wine mixture. I already have the wine, but it's just full of sediments I want to strain out. That I can't do on Shabbos. There's no way around that. That is borer or it's maraked, and we discussed that last time. It's important to know which of those two malachos it is, but either way, it's some form of separating, which we know is prohibited to do on Shabbos. The water, though, presumably, the reason why you are allowed to, and it's the way that the Rishonim explained it, the reason you're allowed to pour, the Meforshim explained, the reason you're allowed to pour the water through the filter that has the sediment sitting in it is because you could ask the question, why is it not the same issue of separation, right? And there it's because the water that is going to be coming out from the strainer or from the filter already was not a mixture when it went into the strainer. Okay, you're running it over the sediments. Let's say there were no sediments there. Can I run water through a filter on Shabbos? Of course. Why not? You're not separating anything, right? And so there's a whole shaila about, let's say using Brita filters on Shabbos. So Brita filters on Shabbos, for the average person, there shouldn't be any problem with it. Why? Because the only potential reason why there may be a problem with it is if a person would never, ever, ever drink from tap water. If a person would never drink tap water, then you wouldn't be allowed to use the Brita filter. But if a person has to take a pill and the only option they have is using tap water, of course they're going to use it. The average person, I think, would. So maybe there's some, really, really sensitive people out there about their water that would never, ever, 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 ever use tap water. So for them, maybe it'd be a prohibition to filter water on Shabbos. But the average person, you're not separating anything. You're not doing anything. And maybe it takes away some of the bitter taste. It may taste a little bit better. Okay, whatever. But You're not, there's no, mixture to the naked eye that you are separating, as opposed to the wine, there was, right? You separated out the sediments. So when I pour the water through the filter that just has sediments in it, I'm not filtering anything out of the water. I'm running water over something, and then the water is taking it along with it. And that there's no prohibition on Shabbos to do. This poses a question regarding French press coffee makers, pour over coffee makers, and tea bags on Shabbos. So just for simplicity or clarification purposes, let's make sure that we know our terms. Pour over coffee. Okay, a pour over coffee maker, where you take a filter. Okay, let's get a good picture of the process. You take a filter, and here we go. So you take a filter. Here we go. This is a good classic one. Okay, you take a filter, you put it inside this red mechanism, you put the red device over your coffee mug, and you pour the water over the coffee through the filter, and you have perfectly brewed coffee sitting in your cup. Is this permitted to do on Shabbos? So let's take a step back, and tea bags as well. Tea bags also potentially could be a problem, right? Because the tea bags is also it's like the sediment sitting in the filter, right? That you are putting inside of the coffee cup. Now, from the basic reading of the Mishnah, it would seem as though there should be no problem, right? Because the Mishnah is saying that it's not considered borer if the two items were separate, right? There was water, was not the mixture, okay? So let's take a step back to at least point out some potential problems, pitfalls, how to get around them, etc. Just making coffee on Shabbos in general. So let's say a person wanted perfectly freshly brewed coffee on Shabbos. So one potential option is creative option would be, well, let's say I have my Mr. Coffee, and I was at Ralph's today, and I aside for seeing Mark Lebovitz, I also saw sitting in Ralph's this new Mr. Coffee machine where it makes Mr. Iced Coffee. So they have coffee machines and iced coffee machines, and let's say I put my coffee machine on a timer where I set up a mechanism that on Shabbos, I have all the beans set up beforehand, I have all the water filled beforehand, and I have it set on a timer. When the timer goes, so it kicks on, and the coffee is made. Now, practically speaking, whether or not that's a possibility based on the manufacturing details, the product details, I don't know. But let's even presume that one could do that with their Mr. Coffee machine. So presumably there should be no problem in doing so. We know that there are 39 malachos, as we've been discussing throughout Masechah Shabbos, that we're nearing towards the end of. And these 39 malachos are patterned after the construction of the Mishkan. And one of the 39 malachos is cooking. One is not allowed to cook on Shabbos. So here you're not cooking on, you're not actively cooking on Shabbos. You're allowing it to happen passively. But there's potentially a different problem, which is the Gemara on Daf Yud Ches, which we've discussed in the past, called Shehiyah and Hachazara, where our rabbis were concerned that if a person has food cooking on Shabbos, you're going to come over and stoke the coals in order to make the cooking process go by quicker and more efficiently. And there's a concern that a person is going to accidentally do something like that, which is why there are problems with just leaving food inside of an oven or leaving food inside of on top of an open flame, which is why we have things like a Shabbos blech, a electric hot plate, which if it's non-adjustable, it says Rav Moshe and says Rav Shlomo Zalman and say that Rav Vadio say for sure that there's no problem with using an electric hot plate because it's non-adjustable. It's impossible to quote unquote stoke the coals if there are no coals to stoke. There's no mechanism to make the temperature go higher or lower or anything like that. And therefore, so for a coffee maker as well, I think coffee makers in general are non-adjustable. There's no such thing as making your coffee cook faster. It would be impossible to do such a thing. So if that's the case, presumably there would be no problem of shahiyah or hachazara either. I think practically speaking, it's not the best idea, number one, because I think people may fall into a different pitfall, which potentially could be an Isser D'Oraisa on Shabbos. If let's say they don't have enough water in the machine, they might throw in a little bit extra water. They can't add beans to the maker on Shabbos. That's another thing that a person might make a mistake about. I think it's you become more vulnerable to mistakes that are pretty egregious mistakes on Shabbos, inadvertently, of course. No one would do it on purpose, but it's just, those are mistakes that could happen. So that would be potentially a very creative option, but I don't think it's what's practically done for a lot of reasons that are mostly just logistical and practical. We take more of a conservative approach when preparing our tea and coffee on Shabbos. So what would the next option be? The next option, let's go with the easiest route and then work our way backwards. Then the opposite extreme, inside for freshly brewed coffee, would probably be instant coffee. So how would one make instant coffee and instant tea on Shabbos? So we know that the Gemara tells us that kli sheni eino mevashal. Let's say I have a hot tea kettle of water, a hot boiling pot of water, and I took the hot boiling pot of water and poured it onto coffee grounds or poured it onto instant coffee or tea bag or the like. That could potentially be an Isser D'Oraisa on Shabbos, because that is a Kli Rishon. That is an original vessel. You boil things in there. That is how one would cook. According to most Rishonim, that would be an Isser D'Oraisa to do. So what one can do, as the Gemara says, is on Daf Lamed Ches Masechah Shabbos, that Kli Sheni Eino Mevashal, that a secondary Kli does not cook. We discussed this way, probably a year ago. We discussed this. Right? We probably discussed this about a year ago or close to a year ago. Certainly before the shutdown, we were learning about these topics, and we had pointed out from Tosfos that why is that Kli Sheni is not mevashel? Why does it not cook? Because one could pose a very logical, question on this concept from the Gemara that if it's in a secondary cup, it's not going to cook. What are you talking about? Did the temperature change? No, temperature is exactly the same. Why would that affect it? At the end of the day? Is it boiling water? Yeah, it's boiling water. Is it going to make the coffee exactly the same? Yeah, it's going to make the coffee exactly the same. So why would Kli Sheni just be off the hook? So Tosfos explains with pretty cryptic language, but basically the explanation we gave, which is the explanation that's given by Rav Elchanan Wasserman in the Kovei Shiurim, and also given by the Aglei Tal, which is basically that it's Eino derech bishul bekach, that it's not the normal way to cook something. If I wanted to make a pot of noodles, I wouldn't pour boiling water into one pot and then take that boiling water, pour it into another pot, and then cook and then put my noodles inside of that boiling pot of water. It's just not the way that something is cooked. And if it's not the way that something is cooked, so then we know, and we've discussed many times, that there's this concept of meleches machasheves asrei Torah, that in order to violate Shabbos, it needs to be done in an artisan way, the way that the malacha was done, patterned after the Mishkan, that it needs to be done in this thoughtful way. And if it's done out of the regular way, so then it drops it already down to an Isser D'Rabbanan. So then if that's the case, once it's Eino derech bishul bekach, and it's not real, it's not real cooking because these things were already cooked before. And if that's the case, so then there would be no problem of using a Kli Sheni for the coffee grounds or for the tea leaves. This is the basic approach. So the basic approach, if I want to make myself an instant cup of coffee, I have, let's say, a hot water urn. I take from the hot water urn and put it into a secondary cup. That's the Kli Rishon. I put it into a Kli Sheni. Okay. Now that it's in the Kli Sheni, technically speaking, according to many poskim, like Rav Moshe Feinstein, I would be allowed to put my instant coffee or my tea bag inside the cup. However, there is Rav Moshe Feinstein says that there is another concern one has to have, and this is for the opinion of the Yereim. The Yereim is one of the Rishonim quoted in the Beis Yosef. The Yereim says that, the Gemara has this concept called Kale Habishol, which basically is that things, have at different degrees in which they need to go through a cooking process in order to go from a state of being raw to being cooked, uncooked to cooked. There are some things that are easily cooked, easily cooked. Like the Gemara has salt. Salt is considered kale habishol. It can change form in a very rapidly, and therefore it's considered easily cooked. The Gemara says that this whole concept of kli sheni einu mavashel does not apply to kale habishol. Okay, it doesn't apply to things that are easily cooked. And this is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, as discussed in the Yereim, quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. So then if that's the case, the Mishnah Berurah says, well, we don't know what's considered kale habishol and not kale habishol. We don't know what's considered something to be under the Gemara standard of easily cooked versus something that is cooked in a regular state of cooking process. Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah basically throws his hands up in the air and says, well, we have to treat everything then as kale habishol, since we don't know what isn't kale habishol and can potentially be an isur d'oraisa. So this is the Mishnah Berurah approach. The Chazon Ish says, why do you have to have such a pessimistic view on the Gemara? Seemed to be talking about like an exception. It pointed out to like a couple different food items that would be considered kale habishol. Presumably speaking, there are so many things, most things are not kale habishol. Who's to say that tea or coffee is kale habishol? And in fact, they quote in the halachic biography, I guess you can call it, of the Chazon Ish, where the Stipler wrote this, or I'm sorry, it wasn't the Stipler, it was a student of the Stipler wrote this halachic biography of both the Chazon Ish and the Stipler, and he tells a lot of practices of the Stipler and the Chazon Ish, who were brother-in-laws. And he points out that he says the Chazon Ish would make tea using just the kli sheni on Shabbos. That was he didn't use the kli shlishi. He didn't feel the need to use a kli shlishi. He didn't feel that it was kale habishol. Rav Soloveitchik says that he has a Masorah from his family that tea and coffee are not considered kale habishol, and then a kli sheni, a secondary kli, would be good enough. You don't need to go into the third kli. But Rav Moshe Feinstein thinks that it's important to be machmer for this, since we don't know. Best to go with the kli shlishi route. In general, it's good to be in the practice of kli shlishi, because we'll get to soon how for certain things it's important to use kli shlishi anyway. Okay, for instant coffee and instant tea, it's probably good enough to use kli shlishi, but kli sheni, I'm sorry, a secondary kli. But for a number of other hot drink preparations, you would need to use a kli shlishi, which we'll get to soon. So now we've done the two polar opposites. We've done fully brewed hot coffee. Okay, that you set up a timer. Good for you if you could figure that out. Again, not recommended, because there's just a lot of logistical and then potentially halachic pitfalls one can fall into that are quite severe. And then the opposite extreme, the easiest route, is the instant coffee, instant tea. What about the pour over? We saw the beautiful picture of the pour over coffee. What is the story with pour over? So you don't put instant coffee inside of a filter. What do you put inside of a filter? You put in coffee grounds, right? So the coffee grounds are uncooked, and you are going to be pouring the hot water over them. So again, our Mishnah said, Nosnin mayim al gabe hashmarim, the second Mishnah, that if I pour water over the sediments, that is fine. Misanas hayayin, that I could pour it through a filter, and basically the coffee flavor is just going into the water as it goes through the filter. For here, though, what would be recommended would be to use a kli shlishi, because here you don't want to get into the shaila of potentially this being kale habishal in the way that it actually is cooking something. So here, using a kli shlishi would be important, and using a pour over probably would be no problem. There's another type of coffee maker called a French press, which is basically the same idea of a pour over, just in the opposite, where you are plunging the water down and it's absorbing the coffee flavor, and the coffee then goes up. So it's kind of just exactly the opposite of the as the pour over, and therefore it would seem to be no problem. The problem, though, with a French press as opposed to a pour over would be that while our Mishnah says that I'm pouring the water over the coffee and then the water catches onto the coffee flavor and it comes out as coffee on the other end, that would be no problem. By the French press, here you're using a kli, the plunger, using an instrument in order to separate the water from the coffee grounds, right? The water and coffee mix together, it brews it all up, and then you're using the plunger to separate it. So here, there's, I think, more room to say that this could potentially be a problem. I think the way that the poskim say it to get yourself out of the potential problem of French press is just don't press it down all the way. If you don't press it down all the way, then it's at least, and I'll explain why in a second, why it's not going to be a problem of borer, but that will get you out of the issue of borer. Why does it get you out of the issue of borer? Because there's a Taz that discusses the fly in the tea shaila. So you're drinking your tea, and all of a sudden, zzz, boom, into your tea lands a fly who is looking to take a warm bath, makes himself comfortable inside your tea. You want to get it out of there in order so you can keep drinking your tea. So you want to get the tea, you want to get the fly out of the tea. So what can one do? So says the Taz, what one could do is the following. Okay, let's pretend that I have a fly over here. Okay, what one could do is you take a spoon and you scoop it out. Now, sitting in the middle of my spoon is the fly plus a spoonful of tea or coffee in my case. Says the Taz, that gets you out of the issue of borer. What's borer, says the Taz? Separating bad from good. Here, when you take the fly out with the coffee, you're separating coffee from coffee. The fly is just part of the coffee that's on your spoon. But since there is coffee as part of the fly, so then it's good from good. There's no issue of borer when you're separating good from good. That's what the Taz says, and therefore you would not have any problem of let's say the French press. If you don't press it down all the way, you still are left with the mixture of coffee and coffee grounds, right? You're still left with that at the bottom of the pot. So therefore, you're going to be getting out of the issue of borer. Tea has potentially one other issue to it, and this is really getting technical. But this is the amazing thing about halacha, is that as you dig and as things develop and your eyes are open to it, it may not be it's a problem, but it's still it's the way a person thinks. It's the way a person goes about life is in a very with a different set of glasses. So it's discussed in the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa the following potential problem one could have with tea. What's that problem with tea? I put the tea bag, and if I wish I was drinking tea instead of coffee right now, but if I put the tea bag inside of my my mug, okay, let's pretend this is my tea bag, okay, I put it in, it's sitting there, it's seeping away, and once I see that I have enough of it's good enough, I have enough of the tea absorbed into the water, it's good, it's to my liking. Now I want to take my tea bag out. Okay, which I'm sure everyone on this call has done hundreds of times in their lifetime. When you take the tea bag out, let's read the first Mishnah again over here. What did the Mishnah say? Rebbe Lazar Omer, Rebbe Lazar says, Tolan, okay? Chachamim Omer ein tolan as a mishmeres b'Shabbos, ve'ein nostin l'taluya b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to pour the wine through a strainer on Shabbos, okay, in order to remove the sediments from the wine, and that what you'll be left with is just wine. What's inside of my tea bag? Tea leaves, dried out tea leaves. Once the dried out tea leaves go into the cup, so then it doesn't just go one way. It's not unilateral. It's not that it's only tea being put into the water. Now there's water being put into the bag. Inside the bag, there is tea and tea leaves. And when I lift up the bag, what's going to be dripping into my cup from the bag, from my little mini strainer? Tea. I'm essentially straining tea into my cup. Isn't that a problem from the first Mishnah over here? So said Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that cute, a bit ridiculous. A tea bag is not a strainer. Here you are pouring you're doing the activity of actually straining versus just removing a tea bag. Okay, so he thinks it's a ridiculous thing to be concerned about, but there are those out there that are concerned. So you have always the Taz to rely on. If I remove my tea bag using my spoon, so I'm taking with the tea bag water as well, and then you're not going to get into any borer issues. So if a person wants to be super machmer, they could remove their tea bag using a spoon and take some of the tea out with the tea bag. But from a purely halachic perspective, there is nothing to worry about. One last potential problem with tea and coffee is microbrew coffee. Microbrew coffee is this, I don't think it's so new anymore, but a relatively new innovation in the realm of coffee making, which for an industry that's been around for a few centuries, anything that's been done in the last 100 years is probably an innovation. The microbrew coffee, like the Starbucks instant coffee. So Starbucks instant coffee is a little different. What is it? It's not just these dry freeze, coffee grounds that are already cooked and then dried out, and that it's instant coffee. But what they have tried to accomplish, which they do a okay job at, I myself am not the biggest fan, but then again, I'm also a coffee snob. What they try to accomplish is that they want to mimic a freshly brewed cup into instant form. So what they did is that they mixed in with their regular instant coffee these super finely ground coffee beans that are roasted, okay? So you're getting that roasted full coffee flavor mixed in with the instant coffee, and it gives it more of that robust flavor, okay? So if that's the case, that could pose the following problem. The problem of the coffee grounds that are roasted, okay? There, if you are going to be adding hot water to them, that could potentially be doing bishul on something that was not already cooked, but rather something that was roasted. And we know that there are different types of cooking methods according to the Torah. There is bishul, which is cooking through the medium of a liquid, roasting, which is just dry heat, and afia, which is baking. Okay, those are different types of cooking processes, and therefore we don't say ein bishul achar bishul. We don't say you can't cook something once it's cooked if you're doing a different cooking method now. So if something was roasted and then cooked, according to the Shulchan Aruch, that is potentially a problem. So there are those that are machmer not to use the Starbucks via instant packets. But if you use a kli shlishi, certainly there's no problem. You don't have to worry about it at all. So some are machmir use a kli shlishi when using the via packets, but there's also opinions found in the poskim that since most of it is instant coffee anyway, you don't have anything to worry about because it's all mixed up and you have a majority of instant. That is the basic summary of the laws pertaining to making coffee on Shabbos. Coffee is just to add a note, is something's been going around recently that I think is worth sharing. That coffee is a real symbol of the times that we're living in, where coffee, from a symbolic standpoint, coffee is something that is dark and light, right? You have the coffee and you have the milk. You have hot and cold, okay? The coffee, hot coffee, and the cold milk. You have the sweet milk with the bitter coffee coming together for just the most perfect and delicious drink in the entire world. It's Me'ein Olam Haba. This is very symbolic of the way that we live in general. We wax and wane. There are different elements to our lives that are both bitter and sweet. Like the Rambam has in the beginning of Hilchos Avelos. The Rambam starts Hilchos Avelos with, what if someone goes into Avelos on their wedding day, which is a sugya in Maseches Ksubas Handaf Daled. But the Rambam chooses that should be the first topic of discussion, maybe to highlight this sense that because in life there is this this dual reality where there are good things and bad things and things in between, and there are difficulties. And when the Torah records the mitzvah of the chatzotzros, so blowing the trumpets, that there are certain times of the year that we blow trumpets, and certain times in life we blow trumpets. If there's a very difficult thing going on in life, hatzar hatzaroreschem, as the pasuk tells us in Parshas Bahaloscha, that a difficult thing is happening, so we blow the chatzotros. We also blow the chatzotros every Yom Tov, is what it says in the Torah, because this is the human experience. That there are different things. We turn to God when there is joy, when there is sorrow, and it's all presented by a delicious cup of coffee. All right, we will stop here for now.